All right. So I don't mind showing my face because I am very beautiful. So anyways, what did you people come out here for? What's up? What questions do we have? Nothing? That's awesome. Any questions about the midterm exam? No? Hello? You people gonna ask
Sorry,
any?
I was double
Matthew's gonna hit it
clicking
off for
the,
us. Thank you, Matthew. Go ahead. Sorry.
you can call me Matt. I was
Matt.
double clicking the mute button. So you put out this keyword list.
Right.
I hope I'm not too loud. I don't have a regular microphone.
No, you're fine.
And there was a couple things on there that I don't remember seeing from reading, and I didn't know if you had like any alternate sources or articles or stuff to. And I'm pulling up the list now so I can give you an example. I don't remember talking about Cuba and Angola.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember where the question about security dilemmas came up. I mean, I have a pretty good idea of what it is and how it works, but.
So those two we'll tackle first. Did I mention, does anyone else in the group remember me talking about Cuba and Angola? I believe I talked about it, and if I didn't, I'll just talk about it now because it has to be in there. Basically, the idea was, and I'll go back to make sure I did talk about it in one of the lectures. Sometimes the lectures can be, but basically, we look at the rational actor model, right? And that is what neorealism is all about. So like states move for their quote unquote rational actor. Well, a lot of people don't know this, but Cuba actually invaded Angola in the 1970s, when at the time the Ford administration was giving Cuba some detente. Basically, we'll give you aid, get on our side. Because remember, it was Nixon and Kissinger that opened relations with China that broke that kind of Chinese what they would call Sino-Soviet Split, which was a very brilliant tactical move in the Cold War. So they thought, well, we'll do it with Cuba. Castro instead invaded Angola because there was a revolution going on there. And we were supporting some pretty reactionary people. And Cuba, was against apartheid. And, they fought against South Africa and this other group called UNITA. So it basically showed this invasion that, and I think Henry Kissinger, one of them, maybe someone said we were going to turn Cuba into an effing parking lot, meaning they want to invade Cuba after that. That basically, it was asked to Castro, why would you do this instead of making relations with the United States? Because the Cuban economy, so basically he was like, well, we're all revolutionary first. And it actually pushed back all of the forces of UNITA, which the United States was supporting in South Africa. And the revolutionary group actually won. So it was a pretty interesting move. But why would Castro do that? From a rational actor's perspective, it didn't seem very smart, but that's what the point is that people aren't always a rational actor. They're very emotional. They have ideologies. They might be doing things that aren't always quote unquote in the rational interest, but they're doing it for other reasons, like the classical realists would stress. So it's not that states are just rational actors. As far as the security dilemma goes, that's a very important concept, because the idea is that when one state increases its weaponry because we live in a self-help system, we have to, like say the United States, Canada, etc., increase our armaments. Well, that makes other states nervous, so then other states increase their armaments. A good example of the current situation of Iran and Saudi Arabia, where if Iran continues to develop nuclear capability, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others will want to. Same thing what's going on with North Korea that just launched the missile, where that's making Japan and South Korea very nervous. That's a security dilemma. It's a dilemma. On the one hand, you have to build up your military. On the other hand, you make other states nervous. The constructivists say that might be true, but there's actually meaning to these missiles. So the fact that the United States develops armament is very, very good for Canada, but bad for Cuba. So it depends on the enemy and the friend distinction, which is built over time. In fact, the UK was that got out of the European Union, Brexit. A lot of constructivists would look at the identity part of that. The same thing goes in the last quiz about Turkey, that, you know, Turkey is trying to, well, this was back a while back, to shed its kind of quote unquote, you know, Muslim identity and say we are part of Europe. Whereas, you know, the people who are against Turkey being in the European Union, they say, no, you're not a Christian identity. So constructivists look at that meaning and identity and they apply it to broad ranges of international politics. Same with Catalonia. Linguistics, you know, the identity, history, etc., all play a part in why Catalonia would want independence from Spain. So I hope that kind of addressed. So those are different questions. One, on Angola, Castro invaded Angola, that challenges the rational actor. Two, the idea of the security dilemma, the neo-realists see it as kind of a tit-for-tat movement that automatically happens. But over time, the constructivists say, no, this security dilemma has meaning. So it depends on your friend-enemy distinction and the identity meaning attached to these weaponry. And then the constructivists go beyond that and talk about more of identity, meaning, etc., with the movement of, say, Catalonia. They'll analyze that from the perspective of identity politics. So that's very important. Good questions there, Matthew. What else do we have?
Yeah, I had one on the key terms list as well, on the lion and fox.
Yeah, that's an easy one. That's Machiavelli. The classical realists bring in more diplomacy, human nature, etc. So anything that says lion and fox, you know, is Machiavelli. He was the one that said you have to be both. On the one hand, you have to be a lion, because basically you have to be feared, but you have to be clever like the fox, but never be hated. And let me see how that plays out exactly on the exam to take a look. Oh yeah, the neo-realist one though, I just want to go back. So like, obviously a neo-realist like Mersheimer would see China as a threat, right? He sees, you know, the security dilemma, states expand. It's not that it's, excuse me, against China or for China, it's just that's what states do. So that's important because I was just talking about about the neo-realists. The Machiavellian one would be more about diplomacy, classical realists, etc. So if you apply that to the Ukrainian dilemma we have now, he would look at all of the players involved to see if they were able to you know, come to a good solution, a diplomatic solution. So Kerensky has to be, oh, that's a guy from Russia. Kerensky has to, whatever his name is, has to be kind of a lion and fox dealing with the Russians. But that opens up the door to saying a few things about the Ukrainian crisis. So remember, resources are important for the constructivists, but they would also study in this Ukrainian crisis the meaning and identity attached to all these people. So if you saw the video, the documentary, it was pretty interesting because I think the documentary had those women saying, oh, the United States was helping us during World War II. Now they're supporting the fascists. Russia does have support within the Ukraine to a certain degree, particularly way out east. As you get closer to Kiev, it's low, obviously. And it's been a brutal war, but that's what the constructivists would look at, right? Like who identifies with the Russians, who identify with Ukraine. If you look at it, a neoliberal institutionalist would have another policy where they would support the United Nations playing a prominent role. So you look at the theory we've been studying and how it would play out in real policy. So the neo-realist, the neoliberal institutionalists, they believe in institutions, right? So the United Nations would be a great institution to play a role within this environment. The neoliberal institutionists aren't like the utopian liberals. They concede that there's anarchy, but in the battle of the Ukraine, they would see the United Nations as playing an important role. The economic liberals are interesting because they would see as more integration, more free trade, et cetera, is creating peace. But, and this is a big but, this would make a great paper. Now with Russia more entrenched in international politics, international global trade, people are nervous to put sanctions on Russia for the invasion because they'll get hurt. So like India, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, all these different states are nervous about doing that, and they're not going to do it. That's why, and even some EU countries are saying, you know, that they're not going to put sanctions on Russia, or at least they're going to, you know, not put like we want to put on them. So it's interesting how the deeper Russia gets into the international global system, it was able to do this war because it basically, you know, is people can't put sanctions on Russia. It'll kill their energy dependency. And the same thing goes with Machiavelli, the lion and the fox. You know, Putin and the others of Russia have been going out doing this very, very smart diplomacy with Saudi Arabia, India, Pakistan, Latin America, etc., Iran, to get other countries on their side so they will not put on sanctions. Ooh, that'll be a good question I'll put on there. So, you know, that's Machiavellian classical realism. You know, so that's very important. So economic liberals would say, how do you get peace in the Ukraine? Oh, we need more interdependence in economics, but more Russian involvement in the global economy has created conditions where countries are very nervous to put sanctions on Russia. So that's a pretty interesting thing. And that's why I ask about Waltz and Mearsheimer. The rise of Russia in the region will inevitably lead to confrontation and possibly war. I want to stress something about that question, which I do ask that question. They see any rising power as threatening, right? It might be regional or globally. Russia is an interesting case because I asked that question. I created that question years ago, not like 10 years ago, but like, you know, a few years before the invasion. And I'll even give it to you for a neo-realist, Waltz and Mearsheimer. The rise of Russia in the region will inevitably lead to war. Can you imagine that? And now there is war. So, you know, you might hate Mearsheimer and Waltz, but they have a point. So that definitely will be on that. The Million Dialogue, which we studied with the classical realists, is on it. As I stressed in the lecture, that's all about the Ukrainians' appeal to justice because we're applying it to the Ukraine crisis. But for the more powerful Russia, right, the Russian nation, they'll just say, hey, international system of anarchy, the only justice we have is the power to compel. Can you imagine that? So Ukraine is kind of stuck unless it has the power to push back Russia, and that's why NATO is involved. A Republican liberal would suggest democratization of the world to create peace. So all of these theories have like real life implications. And I don't want to go too fast. Does anyone else have any other questions? I'm kind of going on the list of the exam, so we don't take up too much of your time. Jenny?
The only thing on the list that I was kind of unclear on was the third one on the list, man, state, and war.
Oh yeah, and that is on there, and I'm gonna go. Let me go over that right now because it's like right in my face. I hope you people can't see it. Let me take a look. I just had it. Yeah. So how would they analyze each? One would analyze the system. Man, it should be woman and man. I don't like the man, it's misogynistic. But anyways, man studies the leader. State studies the type of state or within the state, like the bureaucratic model. The more important one is war. How would war analyze this conflict? And that is anarchy. The fact that they don't care about Putin. I mean, you know, not completely. They don't care about anything else. Their argument is because we live in, that is the war, the last one, because we live in a system of anarchy, we will always have some kind of conflict, right? So the only way to stop it, according to these kind of Waltz, Mearsheimer people, is balancing. So they were actually against denuclearizing, is that a word? the Ukraine because they knew Russia would expand and then conquer back the Ukraine. It's pretty interesting. I'm not saying I like Mearsheimer or anything, but it is interesting how this is panned out. So in the last part of that, man is studying the person, right? Like you could do a paper on that kind of unit of analysis, the individual. Is Russia at war because of Putin? It's his personality, or the state, the type of state Russia is, or war, just the fact that we live in an anarchic system. So that's how that last one, which is important for the question, is the anarchy and the system. That's what they would study. So since we live in anarchy, we have self-help systems, security dilemma, etc. Good. Did you want to follow up that with anything else?
The only other question I had, as far as, since a lot of the questions are going to be about the documentary for the battle for Ukraine,
Right.
How specific should
Yeah,
we be
you
watching this
won't-
again and
Right.
taking
No,
notes
you
on-
don't have to go. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but just so you're
Yeah.
not freaking out, anyone who's watching this later or anything, you don't have to go back and, what was this person's name, or what was this area, the Crimea, etc. You don't have to do anything like that. I mean, to be honest, you probably didn't have to see it. You just have to apply the theory to the case. So, like constructivists, they'll look at the meaning, the identity, like those women crying, how they saw it. How would the Thucydides see it? Alliance building, the power to compel. How would, say, Machiavelli study it? Lion and the Fox, the diplomacy involved. That's a good one. I don't have that on here. I think I'll put that on. The fact that the classical realists really put an emphasis on diplomacy more so than the neo-realists. So they would, Machiavelli would look at, like, say, Putin's kind of Machiavellian diplomacy with Saudi Arabia, India, Pakistan, Latin America, Africa, convincing states not to put on sanctions, which is pretty, I'm not a supportive of the invasion personally, but it was pretty good diplomacy. And then how the classical realists, would look at leadership, diplomacy, alliance, human nature. All of those are very important for the classical realists. A utopian liberal would support the League of Nations or something similar. And outlawing war, that's what, if you remember at the very beginning of the course, the League of Nations fell because it's not really realistic for a lot of people, whereas the United Nations is different. The idea of the League of Nations was that we could outlaw war, Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was a total failure. You can't outlaw war. And you also had this one for all for one, Three Musketeers. But when Italy invaded Haile Selassie, it was like, well, we really don't care. So it wasn't really realistic. The United Nations is different, but that's how the utopian liberals would see the world. Any other questions before I go on? Outside that, the video on Donald Duck, constructivism, will be on there. Remember, that's how we socially construct. Did you people watch that video on Donald Duck? Anyone?
Yes.
Yes, it was
All
very
right. That's how we socially construct enemies. It's interesting. For them, it's not about, that is constructivist. It's not that an enemy exists. You have to kind of create the enemy. Right. And you have to create friends when it's in your interest. So like during World War II, Joseph Stalin, a brutal dictator, became Uncle Joe. Right. So that's how we do it. There is something, Bruce Bueno de Mesquita. He's just, all you have to remember from that TED Talk. You don't have to go back, but he would analyze the Ukraine using quantitative statistics. I teach the statistics class in class in the program. So I like statistics, but he's very obsessed with statistics. So that's how he would analyze the situation. That's all you have to know for that. I do talk about the Mapuche indigenous movements, that basically at the beginning of the class, and this is important for the Ukraine because, it's related to all this, because basically a state can be a nation, right? And there can be many nations in a state. So it's kind of weird because the United States is a strong nation state, but most states aren't like that. right? Most states have many nations in them, and then a lot of nations don't have a state. The Mapuche indigenous is spread out in Argentina and Chile, if you remember my background a while ago. And basically, states have many nations, and this nation, the Mapuche indigenous, doesn't have a state. This happens with the Roma of Europe, Palestinians, even Taiwan. You know, the Taiwanese are beginning to see themselves differently than mainland China, but they don't have a state because they're not really a state. As my Chinese student told me, Taiwan's not a country. And I mean, it isn't recognized as a country. So that becomes problematic in the world. So is the Ukraine part of Russia? That's an interesting thing. A lot of Russians do say, you know, Ukraine's part of Russia. So I mean, you know, they see themselves, most Ukrainians, as not part of Russia. But that's where you get the fall of the Soviet Union created all this kind of gelatinous lines. What is a state? What's not? Armenia, and Azerbaijan fight, etc. So you'll have to know that there's many states, but there's nations without a state, and then there are many nations within a state. So that becomes problematic. And some of these people want to break away, like Quebec, and make their own state. That's, I mean, there's a good amount of questions there, 0.5 each. Yeah, that one about the woman crying and calling Russian forces fascist, that's a constructivist point of view. That's going to be on there. Yeah, one of the main differences in the lecture on constructivism, remember, weapons have different meanings for different actors. And that's why in Barcelona, you know, when you see the sign in my lecture, it's basically saying, well, to main Spanish government, those people are terrorists and criminals. They're in jail. But for a lot of people in Barcelona, that is Catalonia, the movement, they're not. They're heroes and they're political prisoners. That's very important for global politics. One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And then, yeah, a problem with neorealists is their emphasis on the nation state as the unit of analysis, as we see in global politics. It's not the case. There's a lot of non-state actors that are very important. Al-Qaeda, obviously, ISIS, that kind of became a semi-state. I talked about the Mapuche indigenous, etc. And that seems it. Let's take a look. So what other questions did you have as I go through this sucker?
I don't know if you answered Matt's
chat.
question from the chat. Yeah.
Oh, let me take a look. Sorry about that. That's right. We have a chat, but my thing is way over here, and I was looking at the things. Could you now? Oh, where's my chat? Let me get it. Ah, there it is. To do codependence versus interdependence. I don't actually ask a question specifically on that, but it's about codependence. But interdependence is neoliberal institutionalism. And they see interdependence as good, right? Like climate change. We have to be on board with this, whether we get a good deal or not, is because we have to be kind of interdependent. And then the Fulbright, sending students abroad, every type of interdependence, United Nations, economic interdependence, so that has flourished into its own thing. But I don't ask specifically interdependence. But if there is something with interdependence, it would be related to neoliberal institutionalism. But as I say, it's very interesting how Russia, I sorry for talking about this too much, but how Russians' integration in the international system has made it more difficult for people to place sanctions. So the idea that more integration will lead to peace might be, you know, challenged in this idea. So that idea of interdependence. We do dependency theory, but that's won't be on there. Remember, this is only the first 4 modules. Anything on economics, I didn't know if you were referring to dependency theory. That's not on there. Just the stuff I talked about. So think about it again. Wrap it up. Constructivists, right, will be on there. Know that they do meaning, identity, etc. Neoliberal institutionalists, right? United Nations, interdependence. Then you have drawing upon the Ukraine crisis. Yeah, one of the weaknesses with the Westphalian nation state, like I talked about, is that basically states might have more than one nation. There's more than one nation in a state. states aren't these unitary actors, not unitary actors, because they might be pulling in different directions. Like there are people in the east part of the Ukraine that actually support the war in Russia. There was an interesting Colombian that lives out there that came out supporting the war, which is interesting. You don't hear that much in the mainstream news, but there are people who in the Ukraine who are supporting Russia, who identify with the Russians. Because when the Soviet Union fell, it's not like you had these straight territories. There were people like in the Ukraine, Estonia, and elsewhere that said, well, I'm Russian, but I'm stuck in this state. That's why the former Yugoslavia broke up. So that's very important. The nation state system, to what extent can we look at the world through the nation state system? There's a lot of problems with that. Now, as I talked about, a neo-realist like Mearsheimer, Russia is expanding, not because of personal reasons, not because it's a bad state, not because of any kind of reason. It's just self-interest. We live in a world of anarchy and all states expand. Iran, after the Iraq war, started expanding into Iraq. Obviously all states expand according to the neo-realist like Mearsheimer. And that's why he would basically, would not support like, studying, say, leadership, etc. Machiavelli would do those things. So what would Machiavelli study? It would study the leadership, being a fox that is kind of deceptive, clever, being a lion, which is strong, but not being hated. I can't stress that enough. Cunning diplomacy. That would also be important. Morgenthau is on there. Sorry if I missed that. That's basically the idea that power is ambiguous. The United States could invade, and destroy Vietnam and Japan, but we couldn't take on the Vietnamese. There's a wide range of ideas of power, factors of power for Morgenthau, geography, national character, etc. That's important. So when you look at the Ukraine crisis, it's not just the fact that Russia has more weapons. It is, the resolve of the Ukrainian people. That's difficult to measure. And the geography. I wonder if they're going to get bogged down in the Ukraine. Again, Bueno de Mesquita, scientific behavioralism or quantitative statistic. An economic liberal, seeing the world integration as being more peaceful. Neo-realists like Mearsheimer and Waltz, they're very pessimistic. They always think states expand and will lead to war. And then obviously the Millennium Dialogue, how would it be applied to the Ukraine crisis? Well, Russia is the more powerful state. The only way the Ukraine can have justice is through the power to compel. That is to basically kick Russia out. And it's doing somewhat well. I mean, the NATO has really supported Zelensky and the military of the Ukraine. And that gets into the Machiavelli. Zelensky went on a huge tour. It's interesting. It's a battle of influence in the world, right? Zelensky versus Putin. Putin has gotten a lot of allies, but so has Zelensky, and NATO is one of them. So this is the battle. That will be on there, the battle of diplomacy. That's a Machiavellian Thucydides, all these classical realists. Ooh, the battle of diplomacy. I like it already. Any other questions? What do we got? Is there something I did not answer clearly? So I said the battle of diplomacy, the idea that Putin is out trying to, that will be on there. That's a good question. That's a classical realist, Thucydides, Machiavelli, Morgenthau, all those people, the idea of getting diplomacy. And that would be an interesting paper in case anyone's stuck. Think about it. You could do the battle of diplomacy. That's a good paper. I'm going to do that paper. The battle of diplomacy. It's like the idea that, both Zelensky and Putin are out in the world basically seeking allies. And that's very important. Any other questions? I'm drinking vodka here, Russian vodka from Putin. So any other questions or comments? Something I didn't address well, because there's no way. I have it in my head, but that doesn't mean I communicate it perfectly. Anything? Denise, Ashley, Van Gogh?
This is Denise. The science, does that relate to the quantitative stats?
Exactly.
So,
That's
Mesquita?
what That's what they call behavioralism. That's all
Okay.
TED Talk, Bueno de Mesquita. If you remember that video, oh my God, he's so obnoxious. But he's very popular. He's at NYU, New York University, and he just wants to put quantitative research on everything. He tries to predict everything. He thinks we're like scientific, rational actors, and you can predict everything. I like statistics, but he's way too arrogant from my point of view with how he thinks he can engineer people's futures. Like he literally thinks, but the problem is things change. Like in that case of his TED Talk, where he was predicting where Iran would go with nuclear energy. But I mean, that was, you can't control international events. So when we killed the Iranian general, and Trump was elected, no one predicted. And then no one predicted Trump would kill the Iranian general. So then Iran starts thinking, hey, we better have nuclear weapons because this is happening. So to me, he's a little arrogant, but it is what they call behavioralism. And it's a very important trend in international politics and the social sciences, generally speaking, is to make it more quote unquote scientific, which connotes quantitative research. I don't know if any of you have taken a statistics class yet. I teach the statistics. I use RR Studio, but that's in class, not online. So you have to ask yourself, is the world malleable to to statistics? And if you do take my 301, because I am teaching that online, that gets into that debate. To what extent can we apply statistics to the world? Is it malleable to, or that is like, applicable to the international system? But for this test, just know TED Talk, Bueno de Mesquita, quantitative research. Good question, Denise. Anything
Sorry,
else?
One last word. I'm sorry. I just noticed that I'm not familiar with ontology.
Yeah, I didn't ask that, but that'll be more important for the next one, because ontology is basically the idea to what extent in international politics does reality exist. That's what you get into with like, what's a terrorist? So when I went to Barcelona, I took those pictures. I take all the pictures in my thing, even this one. Look at those cops ready to kill people. The question is, this is just the example that is on the exam. Barcelona, right? Catalonia, these people want independence. They go to vote, and then Spain, the main government of Spain, sends in troops to basically stop the vote. Are those people voting, and are the leaders of the independent movements, are they heroes or are they villains? Are they traitors? They're in prison. So it's an interesting thing, because the idea of ontology is to what degree is reality real in international politics and politics in general, right? So it's like, it doesn't have to be Cunin conspiracy theory. It's just the idea that, reality is suspect, right? What was 9/11? It's not a terrorist attack until we call it and then legitimize it as a terrorist attack. So that'll be more on the postmodern part that I go over. So don't worry. But it is important for constructivists, because constructivists kind of get into that, because the idea is to what extent can we understand things? And then they get into meaning, identity, etc. Good question. Anything else from you people? Thanks for coming out, Matthew. I got to remember this. You got to remind me if you ever hit me up for a recommendation. Ashley, George, Wibble, Van Gogh, Jenny and stuff. Any other questions? It is multiple choice, the same thing, because I have so many students. That's why it's not essay. But these are good. This is a good time to get used to these exams, because anyone here going to go to law school or graduate school, although they're saying that maybe a lot of schools aren't going to take the LSAT anymore, but they're still important to most schools. LSAT, which is all multiple choice almost, besides an essay, GRE, GMAT, etc. If you go to be a foreign service officer, you got to take these kinds of tests online and stuff. So it is good, open book. You can use whatever you want, but I would really study beforehand, because there's a good 24 questions. So let me make sure. Yeah, there's 12 points. That means there's 24 questions. Anything else? Now, is there anything else you wanted to ask outside the exam? Like papers or anything like that? Because people can benefit from that. Nothing? We'll save that for the Zoom meeting before the final. But remember, there is a paper in the class. It's on anything you want, anything globally speaking, anything that's interesting for you, something maybe you could use in a portfolio, like, a lot of graduate schools, law schools, and internships, etc. ask for a sample paper. This would be a great chance. Write a very good paper, not just to please me and get a good grade, but to kind of put within your professional portfolio. If there's nothing else, we can end there. Anything else?
One
Yeah,
last question that is
um,
outside of the test, but
Uh-huh.
what, for the survey that we had to do, we just had to do one, correct?
Yeah, I think they are all over the place. I take the students' side on that all the time, so don't stress. It's only one. They say sometimes, two, but then they're like, it's only one. They have these TAs that are PhD students. They're overwhelmed, I think, by the amount of students they have. So don't stress too much. Just do one credit, and I give you. I mean, I'm the last person that has the say, so don't. If you do one, that's fine. Because she said that to me before. I said, is it 2 or 1? They're getting confused, and she's like, okay, in the online classes, because they're short at just 1. So don't worry if you just do 1.
The debate responses, are they just typed responses? Or are they also?
No, that I said that. I got a student in my class, and he did a typed response, and I said, "This isn't a typed response. It's like this, like the first one. You have to basically do 3 minutes. I'm trying to give it. I understand being an online student can be tough sometimes. You don't really engage, so it's just to facilitate like this right here, a little more engagement. So you do have to film it. Whether you want to use YouTube, you don't have to do that. You can just put it up. Put it on your computer. It's only 3 minutes, but any person in any debate, you can just basically, and it can be fun. Like, let's say you don't agree with the Spain's independence or China's a threat, etc. You can challenge them respectively. Respectively. Wait, am I saying that right? I'm not that smart. All right. So basically be respectful. But it does have to be on there. Most people have done it correctly, and the debates have been really good. So I've really enjoyed listening to them. Anything else? Nothing? That's it? Okay, so reach out to me if you have any questions. Hit me up on the community forum. If it's of a personal nature, just please talk to me, shoot me an email. Oh wait, someone's just entered. I'm not going over all that. Rachel, sorry, we just ended. I'm sure you're great, but I'm going to this. Don't worry, this is taped. Oh, she dumped it. And I will put it up now. And I do use YouTube because it's all my that's about intellectual property rights. I don't make money off of it, unfortunately. You got to be a kid on a video game making millions. But I do it because I don't want any ASU having rights over my videos, my lectures, particularly from Latin America. So if nothing else, we'll end there. And thanks all so much. Oh, wait, it would seem my mic isn't working.
There's a chat.
Out to Trudy, the research. Oh, okay. Yeah. Just 1 for 2 in the requirement, 2 for the C session. Right. Oh, thanks so much for saying that, George. I appreciate it. Yeah, that seems correct. 1 for the wait for 2 for the C. Yeah, 2 for the C session, but B and A is only 1. Thanks, George. All right, everyone. Take care. I'm sure you got a lot to do. Anything else? I keep asking that. No one speaks. So, go ahead.
For that research credit, there is an option to opt out of it and do the paper instead, right?
Yeah, I guess at the end of the semester, they give you something on that. It's not my gig. They're very nice. Kim Fridkin does a lot of research on this, so we allow them to. They use all our classes and stuff. Wait, when you say the paper, you don't mean the paper in this class, do you?
Well, I think instead of like signing up for that extra credit, there was like another option to do a paper.
That's right. I forget. I don't know much what it is. You'd have to talk to Trudy about it.
Okay, it's not really on your side.
Yeah, we just let them use our class. I know she doesn't get back to students. I know that's why I usually take the students' side. It's like, so don't stress too much. But you got to do something.
Okay,
I would
thank
give
you.
you a little extra. No problem. Okay, everyone. Thanks for coming out. I'll post this so other people can basically, benefit from it if they can benefit from it. But take care, everyone. It was awesome seeing the people that came out. Oh, wait, Rachel just came in. Rachel, we're sorry we ended the session. Rachel, we're sorry we ended it.
Going on.
All right. I'm gonna stop there and